Thomas Huntington here, welcoming you to the opening ceremony of the Union Pacific 150th Anniversary Celebration. And now ask you officially to rise up. And may I present the color guard of the Boy Scout Troop number 50, Sacramento.
Scout salute. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2. Color guard, post the colors. Color guard is dismissed.
All right, guys.
Audience may be seated. Thank you.
And now it is my honor to introduce, as Master of Ceremonies, the Union Pacific Vice President of Public Affairs for the West, Mr. Scott Moore.
Now, there was a time 150 years ago where Mr. Huntington may not have invited the Union Pacific to Sacramento. But 150 years heals all rivalries. And from that point in time, Union Pacific has lived for 150 years and grown to represent 23 states and 7,300 communities. And when it came time to celebrate our 150th anniversary, we knew we'd have to have Sacramento as one of the places for that. So we are glad you're here today. And representing that railroad that has grown to be the largest in the United States, to kick things off for us this morning, is our CEO and President of Union Pacific Railroad, Mr. Jack Corleski.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us as we celebrate our 150th anniversary. I couldn't think of a better venue to have our celebration than here at this beautiful California State Railroad Museum. It's really an outstanding facility. And to help celebrate, I hope that you'll all get a chance to go through the new exhibit that they are opening today. It's called Building America, Abraham Lincoln, California, and Union Pacific. And it's full of photographs and maps and artifacts and memorabilia that covers 150 years of Union Pacific's history. And to help with the celebration this weekend, we brought in a piece of our own living history, our old steam engine, the 844, that has the distinction of being the only steam engine in America who has never been retired from service. She's still out there working for us. And then we also brought a unit on display that you'll see. It's number 9900, the 9900, and that is the newest, most fuel efficient, and most environmentally friendly locomotive that's ever been made. We purchased 25 of them. We're testing them here in the state of California, so we're pretty excited about that. What brings us here, I guess what brings us to Sacramento and why the museum is here and everything else, is because this is one of the places where it all started. You know, you think back 150 years ago, you have a country that's divided north against south, and you have a president that has a remarkable vision. And his vision is to think, what value would it be? How would commerce spread if we could connect California with the rest of this nation? And so that's really what we're doing. On July 1st of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act. It chartered the Central Pacific to start here in Sacramento and to start building east. And it created the Union Pacific Railroad and had us start at the Missouri River in Omaha, Nebraska, and started building west. And, sorry, if you think about it, it took 10,000 men on each side of the country to really fulfill the president's dream. If you were a pick and shovel laborer at the time, you got paid a full $1 a day. A foreman got a whopping $4 a day. And those men worked long hours, 7 days a week, and they on average would lay somewhere between 1 to 3 miles of railroad track a day. And that would be if they could make it through the sub-zero winters and if they could make it through the 100+ degree summers that they had to work through. If you think about diversity, there's a lot of talk today about diversity. Actually, the railroad was one of the first companies in the world to embrace diversity. In fact, it was one of our saving graces. The Union Pacific, a lot of our track laborers were Irish immigrants, and it was really the Chinese that were the saving grace of the Central Pacific. The Chinese laborers, in fact, there was a Chinese gang laying rail that actually laid 10 miles of rail by hand in one day. That's a pretty amazing feat, and interestingly enough, that record of 10 miles in one day is still standing in the United States today. So the two railroads were off and running. They met at Promontory Summit. The last section of rail was actually reserved for that Chinese rail gang to come and lay and actually connect. And the rest, of course, is history. The dignitaries gathered, they drove the Golden Spike, they anchored the vision, and they connected the nation. And the infrastructure for the American dream was put into place. 150 years later, we're here to celebrate the fact that President Lincoln's railroad, the Union Pacific, and that transcontinental line is still alive and well and still delivering the goods that America's businesses and that America's families rely on each and every day. And as we have celebrated over the year, I've been in many forums like this, and I've always said, wouldn't it be fun to bring Abraham Lincoln back for just one day and have him see what we have done with his vision? I mean, and so here he's with us today. He's here somewhere. I saw him earlier, but I always wanted to ask him, what would you think? I mean, did you ever imagine that your railroad would be hauling 9 million carloads of freight in a given year? His vision was to connect California with the rest of the nation. And we've taken it so much further because today we connect America with the world. 40% of our business either originates or terminates in some other country of the world. And I think he would be fascinated if he could visit our Harriman Center because it's less than a mile from where the first rail was laid on the Union Pacific. And yet in that one building today, we track and control the movement of 2,000 trains each and every day. So hopefully, is he here? He was here, I just saw him. Hopefully he's proud of what we've done with his vision, with his railroad. We certainly are. In our 150-year history, we've seen companies come and go. We've seen entire industries come and go, but we're still alive and well, as I said, building the American dream and building America for this country. So in the Golden State, we're proud to say that Union Pacific is the largest railroad. We have 3,300 miles of railroad track. We have 5,000 employees. And we're here today to celebrate the fact that California has been so good to Union Pacific. It was, in fact, the dream that President Lincoln had of connecting this state with the rest of the country that was resulted in us even being created in the first place. And it's a state that is so very important to us today. So we are very excited to kick off our 150th celebration this week. And again, thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thanks for coming out to Omaha to the western part of Union Pacific. You know, we mentioned we needed to have an event in Sacramento, and when we started thinking about where that was going to be, the list was really short. There's only one place to have an event like this here in Sacramento, at the California State Rail Museum. And almost 2 years ago, we started talking about it, thanks to the work of many, including Park Superintendent Kathy Taylor, Museum Director Paul Hammond. We have a great event today, and today to welcome us is the Acting Parks Superintendent, Janelle Beelan. Janelle?
Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here today on behalf of California State Parks, Secretary for Natural Resources John Laird, and Governor Jerry Brown to welcome you all to this celebration and to Old Sacramento State Historic Park and the California State Railroad Museum. You'll hear often during the festival weekend that Sacramento has been a railroad town since the 1850s. That special heritage is celebrated here in Old Sacramento at the California State Railroad Museum, one of the jewels of the California State Park system. From a railroad history perspective, this is hallowed ground. The placement of the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento in the mid-1970s was directly related to the rich history of the Union Pacific Railroad. Not only did the first railroad west of the Mississippi start here in Sacramento in 1852, the Central Pacific Railroad was formally incorporated here in June 1861, and ground was broken for construction of the nation's first transcontinental railroad just 2 blocks from here in January 1863. Ever since, the Union Pacific Railroad has been inextricably linked to Sacramento and now the California State Railroad Museum. And I want to thank our partners at the California State Railroad Museum Foundation for all of their generous support and help in making these events and this fabulous museum that you see here today and have a chance to walk through, as well as the new exhibit, a reality for us. Today the museum is recognized as the most popular railroad museum in North America, conducting programs for over 500,000 visitors each year. The museum displays and interprets artifacts, documents, and more from all major Western railroads. Union Pacific and its predecessor companies have always been supporters of state parks, contributing in numerous ways to make this museum the fine institution that it is today. UP has assisted in the restoration of locomotives, track construction and maintenance, staff support, and more. Most recently, UP very generously supported the museum's efforts to construct a new track connection into the downtown Sacramento rail yards. This was completed just a week ago. The UP crews have assisted with design and construction and have been working side by side with our state parks volunteers and paid staff throughout this whole process. The Railroad Museum's planned expansion into 2 buildings at the former Southern Pacific Sacramento Central Shops, to be known as the Railroad Technology Museum, will bring together the science and engineering innovations of the railroad industry for the public's education and enjoyment. Our new track connection will help California State Parks bring this vision to reality over the next few years. We are delighted that Union Pacific has chosen to celebrate its 150th anniversary with a major event here in Sacramento, the western terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. Connecting the country created the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railway companies. It is a true testament to the greatness of our country that we are here today celebrating that achievement and the 150 years of success that followed. Again, thank you for being here today. Enjoy this wonderful free public event, and congratulations to the Union Pacific Railroad on its sesquicentennial celebration.
Well, we certainly know about the impact of Sacramento and Omaha on the Union Pacific, but if there's one town that probably also had impact, it'd be the city of the Potomac, Washington, D.C. And over the years, 150 years, a variety of people have represented Union Pacific and Sacramento. But one of the great ladies that represents Sacramento now extremely well, and a friend of Union Pacific, Congresswoman Doris Matsui.
Good morning, everyone. Isn't this a beautiful day? Yes, right? What a wonderful day, and really a wonderful time to celebrate 150 years of Union Pacific. Union Pacific has been in our DNA here in Sacramento for a long, long time. When you think about Sacramento Gold Rush in 1849, and just shortly thereafter in 1862, with President Lincoln signing the Pacific Railway Act. What a major accomplishment. And I'm sure people living here in those days never really thought about what changes Sacramento and California would make to the rest of the country. You know, I think about President Lincoln and the weightiness of his job during those years with the Civil War, the North and South pulling apart, and the president trying to move something together. And yet at the same time, having a vision for our country, the rest of this vast country. Now, I don't think he had a sense of how great the signing of this bill would be. But in a sense, he knew that the country was not only North and South, but East and West, unlocking all the possibilities of our fabulous West. The linkages that brought the East and West together. He could have hardly have known what a wonderful institution he created with the railroads. It's an extraordinary impact, certainly on California, but the rest of the country and the world. So, in times of war and peace, hardships and great prosperity, Union Pacific has just kept rolling along across the country and throughout California, and really became a symbol of our nation's perseverance, resilience, and dedication to this country and its success. This year, as we pause, as Union Pacific celebrates its 150 years, we see glimpses into our rich American history. The tourist stop here particularly emphasized how important Union Pacific and the railroads were to opening up California to all the possibilities of the rest of the country, but also having other people in the rest of the country realize that we have a lot of vigor and energy and great ideas right here. And together, East and West and North and South, we have created this fabulous country. The key role Sacramento played is quite obvious to all of us here. And I believe with the tour that's occurring, the rest of the country sees it too. We were the western terminus, and really we played such an important role in the creation of America's railways legacy. When you think about railroads, you really do think about the West and the development of this wonderful, wonderful part of the country. But I must say, as we celebrate California's past, we are also celebrating its future, particularly Sacramento's future. We have been rooted with railroads here. You look at how we're the hub of Union Pacific, both North and South, and East and West. We're a critical hub here for Union Pacific's operations. And yet, we are moving ahead with the future together. If you look about, you talked about the rail yards. We are now on the verge of reviving our rail yards, once again breathing life into historic buildings. The rail yards was truly a vision of all of us in the past and present. At one time, it was the largest employer for more than 80 years. And at one time, it provided jobs for 1/3 of the area's workforce. And now with the relocation of the tracks, as once was mentioned, to the base of these buildings, we are poised to build on that legacy. I'm delighted to be here as we celebrate the past, the present, and look forward to the future, once again, in partnership with Union Pacific. Thank you so much for being here. It's a delight to see you all.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Well, certainly state government was important to the railroads over the years, and as those of you in California know, one of the big four became governor of the state of California in Leland Stanton. Well, today, Sacramentans have another leader representing them in state government. Speaker Pro Tem Gerald Steinberg is a leader that leads not only Sacramento, but the entire state of California. This morning, representing him is his District Director, Susan McKee.
Thank you, and good morning on behalf of Senator Steinberg. We are so honored in the state of California to have been the recipients of helpers with, partners with Union Pacific over the last 150 years. The trains brought the people, the goods, and the wealth to California, and we, as a state, have grown fabulously over the last 150 years. Now, we look forward to the next, and the state of California is still involved with and still in something of a love affair with the trains. We're hoping to build, we are going to build a high-speed rail north and south now. Looking forward to continuing our growth with the railroads and our pride in what we've done growing with the railroads. Union Pacific has been a fabulous partner over the years, and we certainly look forward to another 150 years with Union Pacific. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Susan. And on the Assembly side, representing this area in the Assembly, is Assemblyman Dr. Richard Pan.
Thank you so very much. This is truly a historic occasion, the 150th anniversary of Union Pacific. I do want to first make a plug for the Railroad Museum, because as we're on these wonderful grounds, I'm a member of the Railroad Museum. I hope everyone here will join as well. It's very important to support this very important institution, to recognize the history that so many of the previous speakers have talked about. But I also want to touch upon, as we think about the 150 years, and people already mentioned, it was Abraham Lincoln, it was the middle of the Civil War. This is a country, our country was facing its greatest crisis in its entire history. The country was divided, the survival of the country was in question, we're spending blood and treasure, borrowing huge amounts of money, and yet the Congress and the President said, yeah, we have a war and we're fighting for our lives, but we also need to think about the future. We can't just think about the present. We need to think about the future. And the future is connecting the East and the West, as Congresswoman Matsui said. It is about investing in our infrastructure. And that is actually something that the public sector, government, needs to work with private companies to make happen. And so even though we have this immediate crisis, we need to think about the future. In the same way, even as we're facing our immediate economic crisis and we're pulling out of that, we do need to think about the future and invest in our future. And I think we can draw certainly a very important example about what happened during the Civil War with the establishment of Union Pacific and Central Pacific and the Transcontinental Railroad for lessons for today. And I think it's so very important. The other thing certainly is that rail, the future of rail, people have talked at various points in history in those 150 years, what is the future of rail? There's been times when people thought rails were passé. You had the passenger lines closing down and Amtrak and so forth, and there have been times when people said, well, rail's out, but we have trucks, why do we care about rail anymore? But rail is still one of the most energy efficient ways of moving goods and people across the country. So I actually think the future of rail is bright. California is a railroad town. It will continue to be one. And I'm really thrilled to be here celebrating this 150th anniversary, because it's not just about what happened the past 150 years. It's the next 150 years, which I think is very exciting. And certainly we need to be here in Sacramento and California. We expect to be strong partners with Union Pacific and then with us to be sure those next 150 years will be bright and bring prosperity to our country. So on that, what I want to do is present a resolution on behalf of the California Assembly, and also there's going to be one from the Senate as well, so I'm going to ask Susan McKee to come up. This is on behalf of our regional delegation, myself and my colleagues, Assembly members Roger Dickinson and Allison Huber, and to present this resolution recognizing this very important occasion to the President of Union Pacific.
Assemblyman Pan talked about the crisis which Union Pacific and the Transcontinental Railroad was born. But one of the big crises out here on the West End was how to get through the Sierras. And when it came time for that, it came to the Chinese immigrants, those that know your history of the railroad and how it was built. Without their dedication, their work, it may never gotten done. And this morning, representing the Chinese American and the director of the UFOW Museum, Mr. Stephen Yee.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My, how fast 150 years goes by. The beginning of Union Pacific and the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad gave new meaning to the term East meets West. Indeed, America as a nation gained a quick passage from the East to the West, foreshadowing the destiny of the United States. But East meets West also gained meaning with the migration of thousands of railroad workers from China. Without the efforts of the Chinese, and it's in the display in the museum, the building of America's railroad and the development of our country would have been much more difficult. The toll of Chinese coolies in severe weather and cruel working conditions cannot be underappreciated. Today, legacy has given way to an abundant list of Asian Americans that continue to contribute greatly towards the betterment and the progress of this American dream. Union Pacific surely has given meaning to East meets West, and it also has given meaning to a new homeland of the people of the East meeting the people of the West. 100 years from now, with the help of rail transit, we will surely be a global village. Happy anniversary, Union Pacific.
Well, if the big four were to look out the window 150 years ago, little did they dream the region Sacramento would become. And today, representing the county of Sacramento, is Supervisor Don Natoli.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Scott. I'm very pleased on behalf of the Board of Supervisors of Sacramento County and certainly the people of Sacramento County to offer our congratulations to the Union Pacific on this significant occasion, certainly in the history of this community, but in the history of Union Pacific. And as I heard some of the speakers this morning, it made me think of the hard work and perseverance that it took not only to build this community, but communities as this nation developed throughout the United States. And a big part of that was the railroad and the railroads, and they're linking those communities with other communities throughout this great nation. And I would just note that in the resolution that we have here this morning, that we certainly recognize the many activities that are going to be a part of this celebration today and tomorrow, but also recognize some of the historical accomplishments and contributions that the Union Pacific has made to not only this community, but to the United States and states throughout this country over its illustrious history in the past 150 years. So it's with a great deal of pleasure and certainly pride that on behalf of the Board of Supervisors that we recognize the sesquicentennial of the Union Pacific Railroad, all its contributions and the many, I think, accomplishments that are so much a part of this nation's history. And I'm very confident that over the course of the next 150 years, that the Union Pacific will be a part of the strong tradition and richness and fullness of the growth and prosperity of Sacramento, of this county, of this state, and certainly this nation. And so with that, I want to invite Jack to join me here at the podium and present this on behalf of the County of Sacramento. Congratulations, Union Pacific.
Well, our final speaker before our presentation, we kept for last because we're going to work him out a little. And we think he can handle it, to actually tell you the truth. But, you know, Sacramento, as we've heard many times, is key to the railroad and the western terminus. And representing Sacramento today. The gentleman who's been a leader from the hard court to the council chambers to City Hall. Your own Sacramento Mayor, Kevin Johnson.
How we doing, Sacramento? Well, thank you very much for coming out. We are extremely excited to be celebrating 150 years. Jack, we want to thank you and Union Pacific and your whole team. Let's give them another round of applause. The other thing I want to do really quickly before I get into my short remarks, when you think about 150 years, there are so many people that have contributed. Many of us are here today that are keeping the tradition going, but there are folks who laid the tracks, and those are the unsung heroes. So can we give them a round of applause? So when I think about Union Pacific, I think about three things. One, what they've been able to do is connect goods and services through freight rail. That was a big deal back in the day because you'd be able to take goods and commodities and connect with the United States on the west and the east. And Jack, with all due respect, you said that the tracks connected California with the United States. No, it connected the United States with California. So connectivity was important. Secondly, commute. If you think about this, the rail system also started connecting passengers. And there were people from all over this continent and beyond that would try to come west, and it would take them months to travel. It would be arduous travel to try to get here. But with the Union Pacific and the connectivity, all of a sudden, you were able to take, instead of months, it would be days to be able to connect folks from the east and the west. And that was a big deal. And then thirdly, Union Pacific convenes people. If you look around today, all of us are here because of what Union Pacific did 150 years ago. And going forward, the Sacramento Museum, the California Railroad Museum, and we're going to have two brand new buildings that's going to have technology and bring social and engineering together and talk about the innovations going forward. Union Pacific has been a part of that for 150 years, and that is good news for all of us. In closing, let me just say this. Back in 1862, Abraham Lincoln did something pretty powerful. He started the first transcontinental rail system, which connected our whole country. That is what we're celebrating today. The Western Terminus, where it finally connected the East and the West. The end of the line, the edge of the world connected with California, which was a big deal. Back then, you had a pioneering spirit. You have folks from all over who came here to discover gold, that gold rush tradition. What I want to say is going forward, we as a city, we want to recapture that spirit. We as a city, we want to be prospectors and dreamers all over again. We as a city want to be innovative and have the courage to take risks. And when we think about the next 150 years, you're going to see smart growth. You're going to see transit-oriented development. On behalf of the city and Steve Cohn, council member here, who's his district, we are committed to making sure that jobs and the next 150 years are just as good as the first 150 years. So thank you so much very much. Union Pacific, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. May I ask everyone to rise, please? It is my great honor to introduce to you the 16th President of these United States, Abraham Lincoln.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just a few words for now. I had a chance earlier to walk through the museum, and our hosts have built a most impressive place, chronicling the Transcontinental Railroad, and I encourage each one of you to take a walk around and enjoy it. When I signed the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, I created not only the Union Pacific Railroad Company, but I also ordered the Central Pacific Railroad to build east from Sacramento. On May 10, 1869, a fateful day in America's history, the nation was connected when Central Pacific's ties met Union Pacific's at Promontory Summit, Utah.
The mayor.
General Sherman called it a work of giants, and in my time, it was. And thank you all for joining us here in celebrating this momentous occasion. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to bring our CEO, Jack Kowaleski, back up for help in this presentation for the city of Sacramento.
Well, thank you again, Scott. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap this up here. As we started thinking about how we were going to celebrate 150 years of history of Union Pacific, we started thinking about the various constituencies, the lives that we touched, and who are the true partners in developing the company that exists today and does all the things that we've spoken about this morning. And one thing, as we thought about it, became absolutely clear, and that is that our ties to communities are truly unique compared to some other businesses and some other industries in the United States today. From the early gold rush settlements to the development of watering stations or just railroad stations, over 7,300 communities grew up side by side with the Union Pacific. And those 7,300 communities are the places today that we still serve, that we still bring the goods that their populations need. It's the place where our employees work and live. It's where their children go to school day in, day out. So we view ourselves, and we want to be viewed as good corporate citizens, but every bit a part of those communities. That's why we always say where we have tracks, we have ties. We wanted to honor those historic communities, and particularly those that have a special relationship with Union Pacific. And of course, right at the top of the list is Sacramento. You've heard a number of people talk about the role that Sacramento played, certainly from the very beginning of the Transcontinental Railroad, the Central Pacific launching their move over the Sierra, or through the Sierra Nevada in some case, from Sacramento here in the 1863 timeframe. It was the jumping off point for the gold rush and many of those communities that we serve today. If you lived in Sacramento in those early decades, you were probably a railroader. I think the Congresswoman talked about the fact that in the Sacramento rail mechanical shops, over 7,000 employees worked, particularly during the World War eras, World War II eras. Passenger depot that was built in 1926 from the Southern Pacific was a major hub and employer. Today it serves 40 passenger trains every day. Both of those railroads became part of the Union Pacific system. So Sacramento is considered the heart of the Central Pacific by many rail enthusiasts, and they travel from all over the world to come here and see this outstanding museum. So as you think about it, we're very pleased and honored to be not only celebrating 150 years of history, but also to be celebrating the next 150 years, because as great as our past has been, our future is going to be even so much better. So we have a couple of things that I want to do. First of all, in commemoration of our 150th anniversary, we had coined a partner's coin. It's a tri-metal coin that has some significance, and for each of the medals and the emblem that's there. And I would like to present, if the mayor and the city councilman would please come forward, I'd like to present that. We have one for everybody on the podium here. Thank you very much. And then while you guys are here, we'd very much like to present to you the true designation. You know, everyone has talked about the fact that Sacramento truly is a railroad town. And as part of our 150th anniversary for those very special communities, we have an award, a designation, and I would be honored to present to the city of Sacramento the designation of Union Pacific's Train Town, USA. My only hope is that at 150 years from now, I look as good as Collis P. Huntington looks. There's something about living in California that must be good for you. I'm ready to put the for sale sign up on 9983 Haskell in Omaha and head this way. Thank you very much.
And now, the speeches are over. It's time for the events to begin. And to begin them in style, to help me to begin them in style, welcome back that very well-preserved Collis P. Huntington.
I really just want us to begin the celebration correctly. Once again, shall we all rise for the ending? Let us have 3 hearty cheers for this 150th year celebration. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! And now, may I introduce the star of the show, the Union Pacific